The reason I turned to mysticism was really for existential relief. It was really that it took me a while to understand that I was laboring under a God delusion myself, that I thought that I could understand everything rationally. And this is impossible, obviously. I'm a mortal, finite being, and the universe is as good as infinite. So and I've got all sorts of pre-written scripts and conditioning as a biological agent. So it's laughable to think that I can truly comprehend reality rationally. And the older I got, the more I realized that I was at war with myself, that there were different spirits within me that wanted different things, and that I wasn't integrating them, that I was not even listening to half of them, and that gradually through the pain and tragedy of my life, as we all have, I realized that half the things I thought I was doing, I wasn't. I won't labor the point. I was at war with myself, and that I was at cross purposes, and that fundamentally that I was incredibly vain and prideful and arrogant, really arrogant about how much I knew and understood. And above all, I had this disease. It's a bit negative. But I had a diseased attachment to analysis. I worshipped the faculty of analysis above all, and that was fine. But I made an idol of it, and it made me very dry. It made me very, a bit aspy. It made me anxious. It made me very anxious in the end, because it's I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't turn off, I built this machine to try to understand reality, and then I couldn't turn the fucking thing off. And I couldn't listen. I couldn't, it's I climbed into my head and slammed the door, and I lost my physical intelligence. And this is why, and more I turned to mysticism, because I had a moment reading St. Augustine, of all things, where I realized that, for the first time, I really realized that the soul and the psyche were the same object. Because I was very interested in psychoanalysis and psychology, and I was very interested in, emotional complexes, psychological complexes, negative attachments and so forth. And I'd realized long ago that at some level that demons are metaphors for this, for these complexes. But somehow reading St. Augustine, I was kind of blown off my chair by a deeply felt correspondence that, priests and psychotherapists are looking at the same object, and they're just using different language and different methodology. And this was a kind of oh shit, I can use mysticism as an alternative way to understand the world and myself that's real, that works. And the real kicker, the thing that's really powerful about this, is that when you use the poetic faculties rather than the rational faculties to understand yourself, it is very challenging and it's very different, especially if you've never done it before. But it disengages the ego, or it makes it easier. I will acknowledge that spiritual vanity is a great danger, and there are very dark mystics out there. But broadly speaking, the reason that I turned to mysticism is that it allowed me to continue my search for the truth, as it were, for understanding, for self-understanding, for worldly understanding, within a new frame that didn't lead me back into this vain, self-worshipping, and also kind of helpless thinking. Because as soon as I would try to understand things through psychological terms, it's hard to explain exactly, but without even realizing it, I'd find myself back in this mode where I'm in control and everything's comprehensible. Whereas with mysticism, that doesn't happen, even though it's trying to do the same thing. And I'm struggling to express this here, I guess. But the reason at the moment I'm still kind of calling myself Christian, even though I'm kind of borderline, really blasphemous as fuck, I don't feel like I've got past the legend of Christ, because Christianity is the faith of my people, of my ancestors, and there's an unbroken line of belief in it, and I've been immersed in its culture. So the part of me that wants to like do mysticism can do that without having to analyze stuff. Like if I try to do Buddhism, if I try to do Taoism, it's much more intellectual because it's not something I've grown up implicitly in my culture at a million different levels. It's something that I've read in books. It's something that I'm understanding out of cultural context. It's much easier for me to like do all this sort of backdoor like Frankenstein monster building kind of new age stuff. I don't know how much sense this will make to people, but I just wanted to try to make something a bit less all over the place than my last video and try to just say something about why I'm sort of mystically inclined now and why at the moment I'm still with Christianity and the legend of Christ. It's not that I think there's nothing beyond Christ, just that I can't go, there's no way through, there's no way that I can really, I feel like access the higher truths of Buddhism, say, without really knowing Christ and loving Christ and realizing how influential he is behind all, even like some of the greatest ideas today. And I mean the myth of Christ. I mean, like I'm not even talking about the magic story. I think the myth is the magic. And there's a great irony, as Carl Jung pointed out, that those who kind of reject their own culture's faith in the West and go seeking it outside, like in Buddhism or something, are actually perpetuating the classic Western problem, which is that sort of restless, extroverted, reductive, sort of hunting, gathering, colonial kind of approach, right? It's like, the faith of my fathers is disgusting, but I'm going to go and take the spiritual truth from a foreign land that I don't understand the context deep down. Not really, only intellectually. I'm going to make that my idol. Like this, somehow, I'm not saying you can't be a good Buddhist if you're a Westerner, but I don't know that you can be a great Buddhist if you haven't really loved Christ in some sense, really appreciated what that story has done, how it's carried our people through millennia. Like, I'm embarrassed that I ever laughed at that guy, you know, and like, I don't know, and I'm not saying too much about him, like, and this is what I mean when I call myself a Christian. I mean, I guess it's a small C Christian, and maybe I'm heading to something else, and I know I'm a blasphemous Christian. But like I said in that last recording, I don't see a better story in our culture. And the ones that claim to be more moral don't really pay respect to how much they are Christianity's children. So it's like Christ is king, like he really is for us, for me, for the moment.